July 25th, 1944. The hedgerows of Normandy. Lieutenant General Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the elite Panzer Lehr Division, raised his binoculars to scan the horizon towards St. Lo. Bayerlein was not a man easily rattled. He was a veteran of the African campaign, a former staff officer to Rommel himself. He knew tanks, he knew strategy, and he knew that his Tigers and Panthers were, pound for pound, the deadliest machines on earth. For weeks, his division had been holding the line. They had engaged American Shermans in small skirmishes, and the results were usually the same. The American tanks would advance, the German 88mm guns would roar, and the Shermans would burn. The Germans called them Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter that advertised it, lights the first time, every time. To the German crews, the Sherman was a toy, thin-skinned, undergunned, and prone to exploding. They respected the American artillery, but they mocked the American tank. But on this morning, Bayerlein saw something that made the blood drain from his face. Through the dust kicked up by the carpet bombing that had just ceased, he didn't see a column of tanks. He saw a landscape that had become moving steel. It wasn't 10 tanks. It wasn't 50. It was hundreds. The Americans were launching Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy, and they weren't playing by the rules of tactical engagement anymore. They were playing by the rules of industrial annihilation. Bayerlein grabbed his field telephone to call his forward commanders. "Report!" he barked. The voice on the other end was screaming over the sound of continuous explosions. "They are everywhere, General. We knock one out, and 3 more take its place. We run out of shells before they run out of tanks. It's not a formation, it's a flood." In that moment, the arrogance of the German Panzer arm died. They had spent years perfecting the art of the duel, building machines designed to be invincible in a one-on-one fight. But they had forgotten that war isn't a duel. It's a math problem. And as Bayerlein watched the endless wave of olive-drab steel cresting the hills, he realized that the equation had just become unsolvable. Before we go into next, I want to ask you to subscribe right now and become a member of this channel. Do it so you never miss moments like this. Moments where we tell the truth in a calm, clear way. If thousands of you are watching, I hope all 1,000 of you join us. Because this community is growing, and your presence truly matters here. So to understand the shock of that moment in Normandy, you have to understand the mindset of the German tank commander up until that point. It was a mindset built on a philosophy of quality over quantity, bordering on an obsession with engineering perfection. The German military doctrine was rooted in the idea of the Schwerpunkt, the decisive point. You take your best troops, your best machines, and you smash them through the enemy line with overwhelming force. To do this, they built tanks like the Tiger I and the Panther. These were masterpieces of violence. A Tiger tank had frontal armor so thick that standard Allied anti-tank rounds would simply bounce off it like pebbles. Its 88mm gun could kill a Sherman from 2 kilometers away, long before the American crew could even see where the shot came from. This created a sense of invincibility among the crews. Read the letters home from Panzer commanders in 1943 or early 1944. They don't write about fear of the enemy's machines. They write about mechanical breakdowns or fuel shortages. When they talk about the American Shermans, the tone is often condescending. They view the Sherman as a mass-produced, cheap utility vehicle, a Ford Model T trying to race a Formula One car. One German tank ace, writing in his diary after an engagement in Italy, noted, "The Americans have courage, but their tanks are coffins. We sat on the ridge and picked them off like ducks in a shooting gallery. They rely on speed, but speed is useless if you cannot survive a hit." This belief system was dangerous because it was partially true. In a vacuum, in a flat field, 1 Tiger was worth 5 Shermans. But the Germans made a fatal error in their thinking. They assumed the Americans would fight the way Germans fought, seeking that perfect tactical duel. They didn't understand that the Americans weren't trying to build a better tank. They were building a logistical system that weaponized volume. The German commander saw a tank as a knight's steed, a precious, irreplaceable asset to be husbanded and used by elites. The American commander saw a tank as a round of ammunition, something you use, expend, and immediately replace. This disconnect meant that when the panzer crews looked at a Sherman, they saw a weak opponent. They didn't see what was standing behind it: the smoky, endless assembly lines of Detroit. The first encounters seemed to confirm the German bias. In North Africa and the early Italian campaign, the engagements were often smaller, limited by the rough terrain and the difficulties of supply. Here, the German heavy armor reigned supreme. There is a famous account from a Tiger commander in Tunisia who engaged a group of American tanks. He described the battle almost casually. He wrote that the American shells struck his armor with a, quote, clanging bell sound that left his ears ringing but his tank operational. He simply rotated his turret, aimed, and destroyed the attackers one by one. To him, the Sherman was a target, not a threat. This reinforced the legend of the Panzer elite. The German propaganda machine loved these stories. They painted a picture of the Aryan warrior in his superior machine, holding back the hordes of the East and West. It blinded the high command to the reality of what was happening across the Atlantic. While the Germans were handcrafting Tigers, welding armor plates with artisan precision, American factories were stamping out Shermans like they were toasters. The Germans were tweaking designs, adding complexity, making sure every tolerance was perfect. The Americans were freezing the design and saying, "Make 10,000 of these and don't stop." So when the invasion of France began in June 1944, the German Panzer divisions rushed to the front with their tails up. They expected a hard fight, certainly. They knew the Allied air power was dangerous. But on the ground, tank versus tank, they still believed they were the predators. They moved into the bocage, the hedgerows, confident that their superior armor and guns would allow them to bleed the Allies white. They set up ambushes. They dug their Tigers into defensive positions where they were virtually unkillable. And for the first few weeks, it worked. The Shermans struggled. The losses were horrific. It seemed, for a brief, deceptive moment, that the German philosophy of quality was holding the line. But they were only seeing the tip of the spear. They hadn't yet felt the weight of the shaft. The shift happened in late July 1944. The Americans launched Operation Cobra. This wasn't just an attack. It was a door being kicked down. And this is where the German radio transmissions start to change tone. They go from professional, clipped military reports to something bordering on hysteria. The issue was no longer the quality of the Sherman. It was the presence of the Sherman. German intelligence would report a, quote, a concentration of enemy armor in a sector. The Panzer commander would prepare to engage a battalion, maybe 30 or 40 tanks. He would position his forces to handle that number. Then the attack would begin, and 300 tanks would roll over the hill. General Bayerlein, whose Panzer Lehr division was essentially erased during this period, sent a report to Field Marshal Kluge that is chilling in its resignation. He described how his tanks were knocked out not by superior dueling, but by being swarmed. "My tanks are fighting to the front, but the enemy is already behind us. They flow around our strong points like water. We destroy the lead tanks, but the column does not stop. They simply push the burning wrecks off the road and keep coming." This was the mass formation doctrine in action. The Americans didn't send a tank to fight a tank. They sent a division to fight a platoon. If a German Tiger revealed its position by firing, it might kill a Sherman. But instantly, 5 other Shermans would spot the muzzle flash. They wouldn't try to duel the Tiger. They would smoke it, suppress it with high explosive fire, and flank it. The German crews found themselves in a nightmare scenario. They were exhausted. They had been fighting for days without sleep. Their sophisticated tanks were breaking down and running out of fuel. And every time they looked through their periscopes, they saw fresh, clean American tanks, with full fuel tanks and rested crews. One captured German tanker told his interrogators, "I ran out of armor-piercing shells. Then I ran out of high-explosive shells. Then I ran out of machine gun ammunition. And, still, you were coming. What was I supposed to do? Throw my wrench at you? This leads us to the specific horror of the Hydra effect. In Greek mythology, if you cut off one head of the Hydra, two more grow back. This is exactly how the Panzer commanders began to describe the American armored divisions. There's a specific engagement near the town of Avranches that illustrates this perfectly. A German Panther unit, technically the best medium tank of the war, held a vital crossroads. They had the high ground, they had the range. When the American column approached, the Panthers opened fire. In minutes, 4 Shermans were burning. By German tactical standards, this was a victory. The enemy advance should have halted, regrouped, and called for support. Instead, the American column didn't even slow down. The tanks behind the burning ones simply drove through the hedgerows, bypassing the road, and kept moving forward. They didn't stop to fight the Panthers, they ignored them. They realized that the Panthers couldn't kill all of them, so they just drove past to cut off the German supply lines in the rear. The German commander at the crossroads was left with a stunning realization. He was winning the tactical engagement, but losing the battle. He was killing tanks, but the enemy was miles behind him, seizing his headquarters. This broke the German spirit more than any defeat in battle. Soldiers can handle fighting a strong enemy. What they can't handle is irrelevance. The German panzer crews realized that their skill didn't matter. You could be Michael Wittmann, the greatest tank ace of the war, but if you are surrounded by 50 Shermans who don't care about your kill count, you are just a man in a steel box waiting to die. And the numbers were truly staggering. In 1944, the U.S. produced more tanks in a single month than Germany produced in the entire year. The German commanders on the ground didn't know the exact production statistics, but they could feel them. They felt it in the way the horizon seemed to be made of Sherman tanks. They felt it in the way that, no matter how many they destroyed, the pressure never let up. The tactical paralysis that set in was profound. German defensive doctrine relied on maneuver. You hit the enemy, you fall back, you lure them into a trap, you counterattack. But you can't maneuver when you are swarmed. Radio logs from the 7th Army in Normandy show a breakdown in command and control. Unit commanders stopped asking for permission to attack and started asking for permission to retreat, or simply asking, where are they not? Enemy armor to the north, enemy armor to the south, enemy armor breaching the west flank. The Shermans were using radios in every tank, something the Germans struggled to maintain. This allowed the mass formations to act like a hive mind. If a German tank was spotted, the entire American swarm knew about it instantly. A German heavy tank battalion commander noted with frustration, "The moment we fire, the sky falls on us." He wasn't just talking about tanks. He was talking about the integration of air power. The mass formation of Shermans wasn't working alone. They were the anvil. The hammer was the fighter bombers, the Thunderbolts and Typhoons, circling overhead. The Shermans would pin the German tanks in place with volume of fire, and then the aircraft would drop bombs or rockets. This combination of mass armor and air superiority created a sense of claustrophobia for the German crews. They couldn't move by day because of the planes. They couldn't move by night because the Shermans were pushing into their rear areas. They were static targets. The elite panzer crews, men who had trained for years, found themselves abandoning their multi-million-mark machines, not because they were destroyed, but because they had run out of gas trying to escape a swarm that never slept. They would rig their Tigers with explosives, blow them up, and walk back to Germany on foot. It was the ultimate admission of defeat. The machine was perfect, but the situation was hopeless. As the front collapsed and the Allies raced towards the German border, the psychological impact of the Sherman mass formations made its way into the personal letters of the soldiers. These weren't official reports anymore. These were confessions of fear. A letter found on a captured officer from the 116th Panzer Division read, "It is not like Russia here. In Russia, the enemy came in waves of men. Here, they come in waves of machines. I look at their tanks and I see a factory that never closes. We kill them, and I swear to you, they are like ants. It makes you feel small. It makes you feel that no matter how hard we fight, the outcome was decided years ago in a boardroom in America. Another commander, reflecting on the loss of his entire company, said, "We were champions of the duel, but they brought a war." This distinction between a duel and a war is the key. The Germans were obsessed with the warrior ethos. The Americans were obsessed with the engineer ethos. The German commander looked at a Sherman and laughed at its thin armor. The American commander looked at a Tiger and laughed at its transmission that broke every 150 kilometers. And when those Shermans arrived in mass formation, they brought with them a logistics tale that was a weapon in itself. German crews watched in disbelief as American recovery vehicles would drag a knocked-out Sherman off the field, weld a patch over the hole, wash out the inside, put a new crew in it, and have it back on the line in 48 hours. To a German crew, who had to wait weeks for spare parts that might never arrive, this was black magic. It was demoralizing. It signaled that the enemy wasn't just defeating them. The enemy was replacing their losses faster than the Germans could inflict them. The Ronson might catch fire, but there were always more lighters in the box. In the end, the story of the Sherman versus the Panzer is not a story of specs and armor thickness. It is a story of two different visions of the world colliding. The German vision was romantic, heroic, and doomed. It believed that the superior will and the superior machine would triumph. The American vision was pragmatic, industrial, and overwhelming. It believed that good enough, in vast quantities, beats perfect every time. The German Panzer commanders who scoffed at the Sherman in 1942 were the same men who walked into captivity in 1945, looking past the barbed wire at fields filled with thousands of parked Shermans. They realized then that their mockery had been a defense mechanism. They had mocked the Sherman because they couldn't face the reality of what it represented. It represented a power they couldn't shoot. You can shoot a tank. You can't shoot a supply chain. You can't shoot an economy. You can't shoot a mass formation that stretches from the beaches of Normandy all the way back to the steel mills of Pittsburgh. The silence of the German panzers wasn't caused by the Sherman's gun. It was caused by the Sherman's numbers. The roar of the Tiger was drowned out not by a louder engine, but by 10,000 smaller ones, humming in unison. So the next time you see a picture of a Sherman tank, don't just look at it as a piece of World War II history. Look at it as the thing that broke the back of the German military elite. It wasn't the best tank on the battlefield. It was simply the tank that was there, everywhere, all at once. And in war, being there is the only thing that matters. This is Hidden Horizon Hub, where we uncover the strategic realities behind the historical myths. If you enjoyed this deep dive into armored warfare, make sure you're subscribed. We have more stories coming about the logistical miracles and tactical nightmares of the Second World War. Thanks for watching.